Hello there, this is microbe, and today I have a short video related to something very special to me, mold or fungi. In this case, you see this is a piece of cheese, all right? So what I want to do is to talk about not necessarily just the cheese, but talk about the organism that is growing there. Or I have to say organisms that are growing in here, just because there's not just mold in there, there's a lot of bacteria, probably different yeast and stuff like that, but those are not necessarily the ones that are needed in the cheese to give that flavor of the blue cheese. So since today we're going to talk about cheese, so we get to, it's crumbly, so it should be like that. So we get to eat cheese. So for the next video, we're going to talk about yeast. So we get to, oh no, sorry, we're not talking about any wine or any fermentation, which could be the next video. Let's keep it here. So this is the blue cheese, and this should look like that. As you can see, of course, you're going to see some specific close-up. So you can see there, I'm actually still eating. Very delicious. So as you can see there in this video and pictures, this is using a stereoscope, so that way you can see very close all those veins and cavities where this mold grows in there. The mold, right, the mold that is growing in there is a penicillium. And yeah, it is the same penicillium, well, it is the same fungus called penicillium that we get the penicillin, the antibiotic. Now in this case, this is a different species, or there are different species that can be used for or to make the blue cheese. For example, we got Penicillium glaucum, or another penicillium that we use for the blue cheese is Roquefort. And of course, you probably relate Roquefort with Roquefort and stuff like that. Yes, it's a very popular name in the cheese, but of course in this case is the actual fungus got the name because of the cheese, not the other way around. How do you say that? Well, the thing is, cheese we've been doing this pretty much forever. So before we actually defined a specific taxonomy or name or give their names to the fungus, we've been using these organisms, but we didn't know let's say the name, taxonomy, etc. Beer and bread. We've been doing beer and bread since biblical times. But we didn't know, right? We didn't know that these were specific organisms that utilize the sugar, produce CO2 and stuff like that to create that, what we call fermentation. But we use it. So of course, the name, we actually got their name because of the cheese, not the other way around. Important points for this, like the blue cheese is not, and again, this is probably debatable, but it's not localized, or the blue cheese is from this country, from this other country. In France, so like French blue cheese is called, or it's known by Roquefort. England, like Stilton. In Italy, like Gorgonzola, but those are different variations. And of course, there's more different names depending on the area, and including different, of course, type or strains of penicillium. Okay, for example, Penicillium camembert or camemberti. We don't do blue cheese for that, but you use it for cheese. So it's the same penicillium, but you use a different organism for the different type of cheese. Of course, it's blue cheese because that bluish, veins and cavities that you can see in the actual cheese. So of course we call it blue cheese. And this is the way that the colonies look on plates. Now this fungus is not that it just grow, to clean my hands. It's not that it's just grow in there. People inoculate that fungus into the cheese in order to get that specific flavor. The whole idea of talking about cheese is came from a couple of friends actually asked me about, what about the mold that grows in cheese? Or some people still don't know that those are actually mold or fungi. Maybe some people think that they're bacteria. It's just like the yeast. Some people say, oh yeah, the yeast, the bread would grow because some sort of bacteria that grow in there. Well, those are yeast and those are fungi, right? Those are fungi, the same type of organisms like mushrooms, for example, or mold that grows in your bathroom or like very humid places, caves and basements. Everything that has humidity in there, you would have mold growing in there. You can find penicillium as a contaminant everywhere. Like I grow mushrooms and there's a lot of penicillium that can actually contaminate them. The other reason why I'm doing this video is because lately I've been receiving a lot of emails. So if you have a comment, suggestion, share pictures, share something related to mushrooms, fungi in general, yes, go ahead and send me an email to microgeo@gmail.com or check my Instagram for pictures. All right, so when the blue cheese is on day one, it is acidic. Okay, like the lactose that is in there, the process of doing the cheese and all that produces lactic acid. So it's an acid, right? Acid, pH is down. Okay, when it's something that is not acid, basic, the pH is up. But check this out. So you put the mold, or well, whoever is making the cheese, put the mold in there, and that pH rises again. Not necessarily to the basic area where the pH is more than 7, 8, 9, etc., up to 14. Not like that, but being from being acidic, going a little bit, the pH, that pH will go back to almost neutral. So that's one thing when you eat a cheese, right, and it's very acidic, that means that it hasn't been aged very well. Now there's a lot of different other things and characteristic of the cheese, textures and all that. I'm not an expert on cheese. At least I'm just talking about the microorganisms and how it is the process in there. So that acidity would goes away because the mold is using that lactic acid. So it's using that lactic acid produce another things, and in this case, the pH rise up, so it goes back up again. Okay, so now it's not acidic, it's probably still, close to neutral. It's still on the acidic side, but not as acid as on day one. And that would be day 50, for instance. Okay, another thing is like that mold produce ammonia in it. So the fact that produce ammonia is basic, so it get that pH and neutralize that low pH into close to 7 or neutral, just because it's producing ammonia there. Again, the pH rises. Okay, now that process of going from one to another one, okay, and an organism growing in there producing different things, those are the flavors that accumulate. Remember, the organism is growing, metabolizing things in there, and is producing metabolites or secondary metabolites. In other words, right, to put it in perspective, when you eat, you poop pretty much. So that's what the molds are doing in there, and we're eating all that. Now, of course, this one is delicious, I guess, right? Let's put it that way. Now, right, let's talk about the flavors. Now, the flavors, it comes from different processes that are happening there. But there's two main things. The flavoring from the breaking down of proteins that are there in the actual cheese, right? So when you see the mold growing in there, you can see that there's, of course, the mold growing, and what it's doing is producing a lot of enzymes, right? And breaking down whatever it is, because the mold is actually eating. It's eating those fatty acids. Those fatty acids turn into less complex fatty acids, and eventually they produce ketones in there. Right, so this specific methyl ketones that are produced in there give that specific flavor. Because these proteins that are there are broken down, fatty acids are breaking down, right? Breaking down, so they are less complex. This would give new properties to the cheese. In this case, it can melt easier, right? Easier, because the structures are different. So it started hard, now it's a little bit soft. because the mold utilize whatever is in the surface and turn it into less complex things. Still cheese, right? But it's metabolized. So the melting point of the cheese at day 1 is completely different on day 50. So if it's aged well, it would melt in your burger, right? Or whatever you're doing. You can do a salad too. So you can put blue cheese in the salad. Okay? Let's go both ways. But it would melt very, very well. And that's an indicator, as I mentioned before, that you have a very well aged blue cheese. That process that the mold goes there and break down the proteins is called proteolysis. And pretty much is that. Lysis is breaking down. So you're breaking down those proteins. And the fact that the mold break down those proteins in there helps in the process of, in this case, melting and having a very softer, right, cheese. Now let's take a look how this penicillium mold would look like under the microscope. Before I show you how penicillium look like under the microscope, I need to show you something very interesting. If you have a background in biology, you probably know what I'm talking about. If you don't, then this might be a very good information. Now, in this case, molds reproduce by 2 phases, sexually or asexually. When they reproduce sexually, that means that there is a mycelia, right? These are the cells from the molds. So I'm just drawing it like that. Let's just say positive or negative. There's no really a female or male. And then at some point they combine the genes and all that and produce one organism, in this case, that has genes and combinations from one side and of course from the other side. That is what is called sexual reproduction. In this case, it produced this clitotecium, and these are just sacs that has here the spores, which are called ascospores. And then of course they get released and the new mycelia grow, and this is the way that this mold grow. The other phases are asexual reproduction. And asexual reproduction, it is known that have these structures, which are very characteristic for penicillium. It's kind of like this, and then it have these structures in here. And in these structures, they produce the spores, or conidiospores. This is very characteristic of known penicillium. Now, what was very interesting, when I took a sample from the actual cheese and put it under the slide, I noticed that there were more structures of this one, the sexually reproductory phase of this mold. And when I grew that I took it from the cheese and put it on plate, wait a couple of days, then of course the part that is mainly there is the asexual reproduction. Now there's a story that we can tell about that, but that again, that's going to be for another occasion.